Chapter 1. A Professor's Desperation. The sunlight that streamed through the high, arched windows of the Hogwarts potions dungeon did little to warm the perpetual chill of the stones. It was a sterile, academic light, illuminating dust motes dancing in air thick with the cloying scents of sulfur and stewed mandrake. The walls were lined with a silent, glistening audience of jars, their contents slimy, twitching, or pickled, basking in the morning rays. Before this unnerving menagerie stood Professor Alistair Finch, a man whose quiet brilliance was as much a prisoner of this room as any pickled frog. At 50, Alistair wore his disappointment like a second robe, threadbare and perpetually weary. He watched his fifth-year students, a collection of hunched-over figures, as they waged war against the swelling solution. It was a battle most were losing spectacularly. On the Gryffindor side of the room, a boy named Davies was producing a foul green smoke that smelled vaguely of burnt hair. Across the aisle, a Hufflepuff girl's cauldron had ceased bubbling entirely, its contents now a solid, useless rock. Do try to remember, Mr. Davies, that the recipe calls for powdered bat spleen, not a whole one. Alistair's voice, dry as ancient parchment, cut through the low bubbling. This is potions, not haggis making. 10 points from Gryffindor for attempting to poison the entire class. He moved through the classroom with the slow, deliberate steps of a man walking a path he'd trod 1,000 times before. He paused beside a Slytherin girl, Pusey, whose potion shimmered with a perfect textbook turquoise. A flicker of something, not quite pride, but a quiet acknowledgement of competence passed through him. "Adequate, Miss Pusey," he murmured. "Add the pufferfish eyes one at a time. The solution must remain in equilibrium. It is a delicate art, not a food fight." As he spoke, a familiar tickle started in his throat. He brought a handkerchief to his mouth, turning away from the girl to muffle the dry, hacking cough that followed. He fought to suppress it, to maintain the effortless authority he projected. But a few students glanced up from their cauldrons, their expressions momentarily shifting from focused frustration to mild concern. He straightened, the coughing fit passing, leaving a familiar ache in his chest. "The swelling solution, when brewed correctly," he continued, his voice a little strained, "demonstrates the fundamental principle of magical expansion. It is not merely about making things bigger. It is about unlocking the potential energy stored within an object's matrix. A concept, I am sure, that is utterly lost on most of you." He turned back toward the worn wooden desk at the front of the room, and the tickle returned with a vengeance. Another cough, much harder to conceal this time, racked his body. He gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, as a wave of dizziness washed over him. His vision swam, the rows of colorful, glistening jars blurring into a nauseating kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A timid voice broke the spell. "Professor, are you all right?" Alistair waved a dismissive hand, refusing to grant them the satisfaction of seeing his weakness. "I am perfectly fine," but the words died in his throat. The strength evaporated from his legs, as if siphoned away by an unseen force. The stone floor rushed up to meet him. The last thing he heard was a collective gasp from his students, as the world dissolved into blackness. He awoke to the sterile scent of Dittany and the unnerving quiet of St. Mungo's. He was sitting on an examination table in a painfully white office, dressed not in his familiar robes but in the drab, anonymous clothes of a muggle. Floating in the air around him were magical diagnostic charts, complex diagrams of the human body overlaid with swirling, angry red patterns that pulsed like a malevolent galaxy. His wife Eleonora sat beside him, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were pale. Her face, usually so sharp and animated when discussing some obscure point of magical history, was a mask of fear. Across from them, Healer Thorn, a man whose kind eyes had clearly delivered more than his share of bad news, regarded Alistair with a grave sympathy. "The diagnostic spells are conclusive, Alistair," Thorn said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's a Crake shadow, extremely rare. We've only seen a handful of cases in the last century." "A parasite." Eleonora's voice was a raw whisper. "Of a magical nature, yes," the healer confirmed. "It latches onto the host's magical core and it's what's been causing the fatigue, the cough, the collapse." Alistair said nothing. He stared at a crack in the far wall, his mind a sudden roaring void. The world had narrowed to this sterile room, to the pulsing red charts that told the story of his own decay. He heard Eleonora's question, as if from a great distance. "The treatment?" he asked, his own voice sounding foreign to him. Healer Thorn hesitated, a small, sad gesture that spoke volumes. He waved his wand, and one of the charts drifted closer, the angry red nebula at its center, glowing ominously. That's the difficulty. The parasite has intertwined itself completely with your own magic. Standard purgative potions would unravel your core along with it. It would be instantaneous. Eleanora's breath hitched, a small wounded sound. So what do we do? There must be something. A counter-curse. Experimental charms. Thorn shook his head slowly. We can manage the symptoms. Potions to restore vitality, to ease the cough. But they are palliative. They won't stop the progression. The void in Alistair's mind was replaced by a single cold point of focus. He had to know. How long? The sympathy in the healer's eyes deepened. With aggressive symptom management, best case, 2 years, maybe 3. I am truly sorry. A choked sob finally escaped Eleanora. She reached for Alistair's hand, but he couldn't take it. His hands felt like they belonged to someone else. He could only stare at the white walls of the office, which seemed to be closing in, squeezing the air from his lungs. The floating red charts were no longer abstract diagrams. They were his tombstone, a death sentence written in a language only he could truly understand. Night had fallen by the time they returned home. Their small house, usually a sanctuary of cluttered warmth, felt like a tomb. Books on magical history were stacked on every available surface, a testament to Eleanor's passion. On the mantelpiece, moving photographs of a younger, happier couple with their son Alistair Jr. smiled and waved, oblivious to the silence that now filled the room. Alistair sat in his worn armchair, a half-empty glass of Ogden's old fire whiskey burning a trail down his throat. He stared into the hearth, where the dancing flames offered no comfort, only a vision of his own life turning to ash. Eleanora paced the rug, her restless energy a stark contrast to his frozen stillness. "We'll get a second opinion," she insisted, her voice tight with a hope Alistair could no longer afford. "We'll go to the continent. There are specialists in Vienna. I read about a new diagnostic charm they developed." "With what?" "Eleanora," he cut in, his voice flat and dead. "My Hogwarts salary barely covers the mortgage. We don't have the galleons for a trip to Hogsmeade, let alone Vienna. We'll borrow it from Gideon if we have to." Alistair scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "No, I will not take charity from your blowhard brother. Listening to him boast about his latest raid is bad enough. I will not be his pity project." He took a long, searing drink of the fire whiskey. His gaze drifted to the stack of bills on the mantelpiece, held down by a small pewter dragon. A bill for his son's new school robes, a notice about the rising cost of flu network access. Each one was a small paper cut, bleeding him dry. For years he had felt the slow drain of mediocrity, the sting of being overlooked and underpaid. Now, that slow drain had become a torrent. "Do you know what my legacy will be?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "A pittance of a pension. Decades of service to that school, teaching dunderheads the difference between a Bezoar and a gardenstone. For what? So we can live hand to mouth until I unravel." "Alistair, that's not true," Eleanora pleaded, her voice soft. "We have a good life. We have each other. We have our son. And what happens when I'm gone?" He shot back, turning to face her, his eyes hollow. "The pension dies with me. You'll be left with nothing. A house you can't afford and a mountain of debt." He turned back to the fire, but he wasn't seeing the flames anymore. He was seeing a bleak, gray future for his family. He saw Eleanora, forced to sell her precious books. He saw his son, his bright, promising son, denied opportunities because they couldn't afford them. A cold, hard knot formed in his chest. It was a knot of fear, of rage, and of wounded pride. And from that knot, a new, terrible thought began to unspool. He thought of his own private research, the complex, theoretical potions he'd perfected in secret formulas the ministry deemed too dangerous, too unstable for public consumption. Potions that in the right hands, or the wrong ones, could be worth a fortune. The next day, Alistair found himself in the last place on Earth he wanted to be, his brother-in-law's office at the Ministry of Magic. The air in Gideon Rookwood's workspace was a chaotic symphony of urgency. Maps with magically moving pins covered the walls, and aurors in trench coats strode past with grim purpose. In the center of it all stood Gideon, a large, boisterous man whose self-satisfaction was as pronounced as his thick mustache. And that's when we blasted the door down. Gideon clapped Alistair on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of him. "You should have seen it, Al. Contraband potions everywhere. Shady-looking buggers, the lot of them. We rounded up half of Nocturne Alley's dregs." Alistair, feigning a polite interest, felt a phantom cough tickle his throat. He was here under the pretense of a family visit, a check-in after his spell, but his eyes were sharp, scanning everything. Gideon gestured proudly to a magical evidence board, where a moving photograph showed a young man with greasy hair and a defiant sneer being manhandled by 2 aurors. The caption beneath it read, "Leo Sparky Gable, known associate, minor charms trafficking." Recognition pricked at Alistair's memory. This one, I remember him. Gable, he said, his voice carefully neutral. He had a certain flair for volatile mixtures. Gideon laughed, a loud booming sound. A flair for getting caught, more like small-time punk. He'll be out in a week. These guys, they're just the bottom feeders. They know the streets, but they don't have the brains for the big leagues. As Gideon was called away by another auror, his words echoed in Alistair's mind. They know the streets, but they don't have the brains. The phrase landed like a spark on dry tinder. The terrible idea from the night before began to take shape, to form a coherent, terrifying plan. Brains and streets, chemistry and market. With a subtlety born of years of handling delicate ingredients, Alistair flicked his wand at the evidence board, an exact duplicate of Leo Gable's file, complete with known associates and last known address, peeled itself from the board and flew silently into the inner pocket of his robes. Rain slicked the grimy cobblestones of Nocturne Alley, making the foul-smelling lane glisten under the sickly magical lamps. Alistair stood before a dilapidated tenement, the address from the stolen file, feeling as out of place as a swan in a sewer. The collar of his robe felt tight, suffocating. He took a steadying breath, the cold, damp air doing little to calm the frantic beating of his heart, and knocked. The door creaked open to reveal Leo Gable. He was thinner than Alistair remembered, buzzing with a nervous energy that seemed to make the very air around him vibrate. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, and a look of disbelief crossed his face. "Professor Finch? What the hell are you doing here? May I come in, Mr. Gable?" Alistair's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "I have a business proposition for you." Leo's apartment was a disaster. Empty potion bottles, half-eaten takeaway cartons, and contraband catalogs formed a landscape of squalor. Alistair picked his way through the mess, his face a mask of carefully controlled distaste. "Business?" Leo asked, a mocking edge to his voice. "What kind of business? You gonna pay me to polish your cauldron?" "I saw your arrest report," Alistair said, ignoring the jibe. "Minor charms trafficking. You are, in the parlance of my brother-in-law, a bottom feeder." "Hey, screw you, man," Leo shot back, his eyes flashing with anger. "I get by, you get by," Alistair repeated, selling fizzing whiz-bees and nose-biting teacups. "I am talking about a different class of product, something new, something no one else can make." From the depths of his robes he produced a small crystal vial. Inside, a potion of the purest, most vibrant blue seemed to pulse with its own inner light. He held it up. "Felix Felicis. Liquid luck, but not the weak, diluted rubbish you find at the apothecary. This is chemically pure. Flawless. A single drop would give you the best day of your life. Imagine what a full vial would be worth to the right buyer." Leo stared, mesmerized. The anger drained from his face, replaced by awe. "That's beautiful. But it's Class A contraband. You get caught with that, it's a one-way ticket to Azkaban. Which is why one must be professional," Alistair said. He met Leo's gaze, and in his eyes, the weariness of the professor was gone, replaced by the cold, hard intensity of a man with nothing left to lose. "You know the market, Mr. Gable. You have the street sense. I have the chemistry. I can brew this, but I cannot sell it. You can." He placed the glowing vial on a cluttered table, where it shone like a star in a sea of filth. "So I'll ask you again. Would you like to be in business?" Leo looked from the impossible blue of the potion to the terrifying certainty in Alistair's eyes. He saw the desperation there, but he also saw the genius. He saw a path opening before him, a path leading away from this grimy apartment and his dead-end life. A slow, greedy smile spread across his face. "Yeah," he breathed. "Yeah, Professor, I think I would." As their hands met in a firm, fateful shake, the glowing blue vial on the table between them seemed to pulse, sealing the pact. The dying master and the delinquent apprentice. A terrible, brilliant partnership had just been born.